Welcome to the Goal Podcast, news and commentary from Gun Owners Action League, your leading voice for the Massachusetts gun owner.
I'm Jeff. Across the table is Garrett. We've both recovered from illness in the last couple of weeks.
It's been a brutal couple of weeks, man.
We recorded the last episode, and within 3-4 days, we were both out for the count.
Yep. I'm over it. My voice is, as I'm sure you can hear, still suffering a little bit, but I'm over it.
I'm going to blame you.
All right. Make it my fault. What's news?
Well, so save the date. Goals annual member meeting is coming on Sunday, May 18th, 2025 at 9 a.m. Cyprian Keys in Boylston, Massachusetts. Tickets are on sale now at www.goal.org. Yeah. I'm assuming hopefully by then we'll have weather that's slightly less awful than it is now.
Yeah, weather's been kind of crummy. I think I have faith that it'll be looking up by then. I say we'll be in good shape by May the 18th at 9 a.m. So right on. Looking forward to it.
But in state news, and this is something we're going to have to really pay attention to.
Yeah, all right.
In the next few weeks.
Started digging into this. So as we know, right, we always have to start with that. So Chapter 135, one of the many, many, many awful things that it did is it authorized the formation of a commission to study, quote, emerging firearms technology. I'm sure you remember that as one of the...
Because who doesn't love a good commission that the state can funnel some money into?
The commission has been formed and is made up of 6 legislators, 4 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and a number of non-legislative members, currently 7, I believe. And we'll get to those shortly. But first, that new commission met most recently on Monday, February the 10th,
yeah, this is their second meeting.
It's actually their second meeting. Yes, right. The topic of discussion this time around, microstamping. We've brought this up briefly on previous podcasts, most in relation to the law in California. So California passed a microstamping law 13, 14 years ago, basically mandating impossible technology for all new guns. And as a result, no new guns had been offered for sale in California for more than a decade now, because they don't have this stupid impossible requirement.
Yeah, New Jersey has a similar law essentially saying that once the technology is viable, that it has to be offered for sale.
Yeah. And there's variances and stuff with that law.
Different flavors.
Right. So California's law was challenged in court several times, and most recently it was enjoined by a court, and then California decided to appeal aspects of that injunction, but not the microstamping part. So what that means in you and me language is they appealed the other stuff, but they decided not to fight the injunction against microstamping, basically because they realized it's a stupid, impossible technology and it's not workable.
Yeah, it's a losing end for California.
Yeah. All right. So back to Massachusetts now. Besides the 2 Republican legislative members who are Peter Durant and Don Bertham, on the commission, the other 4 legislators, Michael Moore, John Keenan, Lydia Edwards, Kate Lipper-Garabedian, who happens to be the chair. They're known, basically anti-gun people. All 4 of them voted in favor of Chapter 135.
I think anybody would be foolish to think that a commission of this nature would not be filled with anti-gun people.
Of course, and that's not even most of it. The commission also has 7 non-legislator members. Colonel Jeffrey Noble, the new chief of police, the new colonel of the Mass State Police, who's a transplant from New Jersey, of all places. A Dr. Nicholas Ashford from MIT, technology law professor, appointed by Ron Mariano, by the way.
Yeah, we'll discuss some of his comments.
Oh, yeah. Christopher Call, appointed by Governor Maura Healey. He works with the Post Commission. Jeff Farnsworth from the EOPSS. Jake McGuigan from National Shooting Sports Foundation.
It's like the only one I like.
Yeah, right, so far. A Christina Ronan from the Attorney General's office. And last but not least, Todd Lizotte, co-inventor of, quote, intentional firearms microstamping technology, appointed to the commission by Ron Mariano.
The guy who's the president and CEO of a company who just so happens to offer.
Yeah, the technology that would be.
What he says is a viable version of the technology. And of course, it's all vertically integrated. So he owns the software that creates the code. He owns the software that maintains the database. And he owns the equipment that does the microstamping. And he owns the equipment that does all the follow-up. And
isn't that weird? And you'll never guess he's in favor of microstamping.
Of course.
Go figure, right?
Now he says, I'm a super Second Amendment guy.
I'm a Republican from New Hampshire.
This isn't meant to jam anybody up. This is just, technology.
All right. What is microstamping? Microstamping is a technology that supposedly allows law enforcement to more easily identify firearms that are used in crimes. In its simplest terms, the affected gun has some kind of a mechanism that permanently and intentionally marks a bullet or casing in some manner that would allow law enforcement to identify the gun by looking up a code or whatever in a database. Now, forensic analysis of shell casings and bullets already exists. This is more your field than mine, the forensic stuff. Differences in manufacture, things like scratches in the, scratches
we can get into it if you want.
All that stuff. All of those things can impart markings or basically a thumbprint or a signature on a casing and a bullet just by virtue of the fact that it was fired from the gun. And there's like a whole forensic sub-science about making these identifications.
Yeah, so firearms and tool mark analysis, this is actually what I went to college for, and particularly firearms and tool marks was my thing as a gun guy. So any machined tooling or any tooling is going to impart microscopic imperfections and scratches. Nothing's perfect.
Nothing's perfect.
So if we were to look at, let's say, for example, the head stamp of a fired cartridge.
Yep.
It's going to have a firing pin impression. It's going to have probably, especially a modern semi-automatic pistol, which is what most of this is geared towards. You're going to have microscopic scratches from the extractor claw and the ejector that's going to kick the casing out.
Yeah.
Historically speaking, you could do an analysis where if you recovered the firearm itself, you could fire a test casing and then do a comparison to the casing that you found on, let's say, like a crime scene.
Right.
And you would look for consistencies, the consistencies and the differences to say whether or not it would be reasonable to say that the casing that you found on the crime scene was consistent with a known casing that was fired from the suspected firearm.
Right. That's how you make that evidentiary link.
Right. What this microstamping is claiming to do is to impart encoded information onto that casing that will onto that fired casing that would be extracted and then ejected and presumably left at a crime scene.
And then looked at by a database. Now, the specific technology that this guy is selling, right, that they're specifically looking at, involves firing pins, right? Now, there's different ways people want to put like notches around the outside of the shell casing, do breech face stamps, whatever. This particular discussion over the last couple of meetings has surrounded this guy's technology, in which basically he uses a laser etching machine similar to the technology that they use for punching teeny little holes in laser jet printer fabrics and stuff like that. It's laser etching on metal.
Yeah.
Basically, what he's proposing to do, or what this technology is proposing to do, is to encode a code onto the very tip of a firing pin, such that when the gun is fired, the firing pin strikes the primer, and the primer will be stamped with this code, which can later be read. So that's, narrowed down all of the different possibilities. This is the technology that's supposed to be under discussion here.
Yeah, so the premise that the guy is pitching, and obviously he's got a hell of a financial incentive to pitch it this way.
Obviously,
is that so? Anytime you look at any sort of comparative science, it's all about the database that you then compare it to.
Yeah.
So they're saying that they can encode or create this microstamped code, and then create a database which links it to a particular firearm and a particular serial number. From there, one could then search the serial number in the transaction database, which we currently have, which Chapter 135 then goes on to create just a flat-out gun registry. So in order for this to be viable, you would have to have yet another database of all of the microstamping and codings and the serial numbers of the firearms that firing pin was etched to encode.
Yeah. And I can hear forward in time and coming over the airwaves, everybody who's listening to this podcast right now is drumming their fingers because they've come up, just listening to us, with about 15 different reasons why this can't work from a technology standpoint. And you're all right. Every one of them is viable and correct.
The first thing that's going to come off the top for me is, are you making, is it going to have a negative impact on the performance of the firing pin? Because at the end of the day, the firearm has to work for me, for you, for law enforcement, for whatever military application the guy is also trying to pitch this on.
Mark my words, law enforcement will be exempt.
Oh, most certainly. Most certainly.
So anyway, it continues.
And this is where, when we were talking about this off the air, I just roll my eyes to the back of my head. When people who are clearly not what we would consider firearms people, and I'm putting the air quotes around that.
Oh, yeah.
Saying, well, we've done extensive testing and fired 1,800 rounds through this sample firearm.
It's like, really?
And can still read the code. It's like,
1,800.
Like, no, I want to see 20. I want to see 15. I want to see the marks at, new 15,000, 20,000, 25, 30, 40, 50,000. Essentially, I would be looking for that mark to outlast the performance of the barrel that is being used.
Yeah. And it can't possibly, because the laser etching technology that he's talking about, he's making noises about like work hardening and stuff like that. There's no way that it can last a long time. So the laser etching that he's talking about goes to a depth of about 25 microns, which is about half of the thickness of a human hair.
It's very minimal.
It's very minimal. I don't care how much you work harden the firing pin. It's going to take you not that long to either wear through it or some criminal is just going to take a piece of sandpaper and go, and that'll be the end of it.
Yeah, the laser itself, I would not expect to impart any sort of hardening onto the firing pin.
No, it's going to be work hardening.
The question is whether or not it is going to etch through the work hardening that happens when the firing pin is manufactured.
Yeah. So the surface, we should probably take it as read that the firing pin, once manufactured, is going to have a clean and crisp or whatever, code on it. That would have to be a ground rule. My question is what happens once it gets into the gun and how long does it last?
And not only that, but, firing pins are a wear and tear part on firearms.
Yeah.
There are a lot of reasons and a lot of people that swap firing pins out.
For any number of different reasons.
Competition, performance, general fit and function of a firearm. Those are all, and they try to make it sound like the average person can't swap out a firing pin.
That was listening to the testimony. That's what I was like. I was starting to get a little irritated. I mean, and irritated is actually kind of a weak word for what I was really feeling. How long would it take you, Jeff, to pop out the firing pin of your Glock?
Oh God, I could have it swapped out and I'm going to say while I'm just farting around, 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Yeah. And listening to that guy, he was like, oh, they can't do that stuff. That's too complicated.
I know. He says,
possibly.
Criminals are just too lazy to do such a thing, or they're not going to look it up on Google.
Yeah. Some criminal who goes, oh, you mean I can defeat this with 2 swipes of my wife's nail file, and just pop out a new firing pin?
Well, but all of that aside, even if the technology was perfectly viable and it didn't have any deleterious effect on the firing pin and it was resilient enough and all of those things, the question is then what value does it actually bring to some sort of investigation, which is what they're pitching it for, is as a way of solving crimes.
It's a tool for law enforcement. First off, the only thing that it can do, if everything works perfectly, which is not by any means a given, the only thing that it can do is link you to the original purchaser.
Yeah, the last time that transaction was registered with the state.
Exactly. So if that thing is sold, stolen, whatever, after that fact, even if the criminal does leave the firing pin intact, he's not going to get you. You're not going to find the criminal. You're going to find the person who originally owned the gun.
Yeah, and in the most recent hearing, which is you can actually watch the hearing online through the state's website
if you really want to be irritated,
if you follow the links. But Jake McQuiggan brought up a very salient point, is that most of these crimes that they're talking about they want to solve are committed with stolen firearms.
Yeah.
So what evidentiary value does it really have, other than to say, oh yeah, by the way, we know that this was stolen? Now, the Assistant Attorney General, I think from New Jersey, but it might have been the lady from Massachusetts, it was hard to keep track, says, well, yeah, but now we have, now we can really look into that theft because now it's attached to a gun crime, which to me says then they're really not trying to solve the theft of the firearm in the first place.
No, of course not.
It now only matters that it was used somewhere else.
Right.
You would think that when someone reports a stolen firearm, the police would be looking into it pretty significantly, but she's now claiming that, well, now they can put more resources into finding that stolen gun.
Yeah.
Suggesting that they weren't in the first place.
So what is, and this was another thing that was brought up, what's to stop, criminal from going down to a shooting range, picking up all the brass that they care to pick up that has all kinds of different microstamping codes on it. And just next time he goes to knock over a packy or whatever the hell it is that he's doing, he just scatters those around. And now some
assaulting the crime scene.
Exactly. And now some innocent person is dragged into a criminal investigation, not because of any real reason, for being dragged in, but simply because of this salted evidence that was used, to use your term, basically to frame somebody else.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to suggest, was that, someone who's criminally creative, one of the impacts of modern manufacturing is modularity. Yeah. A lot of firearms are designed to be modular with different slides that fit on different frames and different fire control groups, depending on make, model, manufacturer, and design of a semi-automatic pistol. So someone that had a little bit of a clever streak in them could arguably and rather easily frame someone.
Yep.
But even under all those circumstances, let's say, for example, that you find the casing on the crime scene and you link it to a serial number and you go back to the original purchaser and you find out that was stolen, and then you find the person that stole it and you track it all down, or you end up just coming across and finding, someone gets pulled over and pursuant to the traffic stop, they find the firearm and so on and so on.
Hallelujah. Yeah. Miracle.
It still does not really provide any evidentiary value that I can think of in that shooting or that murder or whatever else, because you still have to link that individual to that crime scene.
You still don't,
and you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they were the person that was holding the firearm and pulled the trigger and did all of that stuff.
And none of this does any of that stuff.
It's a rather disingenuous argument that this is like this amazing be-all, end-all tool of law enforcement, and they're going to be solving so many more crimes that they weren't solving before simply because this technology now exists.
And every gangbanger who now wishes to get away with gun crimes is simply going to take a page from the Jeff Strider book of self-defense firearms and just start using revolvers.
Well, that was
not leaving casings all over the place.
Well, back when the emergence of the existing firearms identification technology came out, you did see a huge resurgence in the Saturday Night Special and in the use of revolvers.
You don't leave casings laying around.
Now, the argument, and so that will of course be brought up in the discussion. And the argument they're going to make is, well, revolvers only hold X amount of rounds and then you have to reload them and blah, 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 blah.
It's yet another reason that semi-automatic pistols are so evil.
Which was a problem that was solved decades ago with a little something called the New York Reload.
Yeah.
You don't carry spare magazines, you carry extra guns.
Makes it easy. All right. All of technological stuff aside, right?
Well, I will say, before we move, so the salient point was ultimately made, and the quiet part was said out loud.
That's where I was going.
By Dr. Ashford, the MIT technology law professor that was appointed by Mariano.
Yeah.
Under the current recommendations that they're making, which is the problem that we're going to face as a Second Amendment community, is once this technology comes into place, they're framing it as, well, once it's available, every FFL will have to offer them for sale, and we're going to incentivize manufacturers to do this, and so on and so on and so on.
No, they won't.
Ashford made the point, and this is what it's really going to come down to, is none of this really means anything unless you put real legal teeth behind jamming up the lawful gun owner.
Yeah.
And saying that
meaningless unless it's a mandate.
And saying that we are going to charge you with crimes. There's going to be a penal code in place that says that if you are in possession of a firearm without a micro-stamped firing pin or breech face or this micro-stamping technology, then it will be a problem.
Yeah. You will face criminal yeah, that's what the guy said. That is undeniably where this is going to end up. There's nothing that the Massachusetts legislature will do that does not end with a mandate on lawful gun owners. And that's that above all. I'm a libertarian. I'm fine with the technology. If somebody wants to invent microstamping and people want to voluntarily adopt that, go right ahead. I have no problem with it. The market will decide. My problem comes when the legislature starts looking at crap like this and says, no, everybody must use this technology, because now it places burdens on us.
Well, and they have the template already in place from Chapter 135 when they instituted the new section of law that says it is going to be unlawful to have a firearm without a serial number.
Yeah.
And then they had to create, which is now under temporary pause for who knows how long. But the state is going to have to issue the state is going to have to issue the serial number, and it's going to have to be etched within X amount of days under all this different stuff.
It's going to have to be registered with the state, and the guy who takes his gun down to the range with a firing pin that is worn, the microstamping is 20, 24 microns thick. You can't just look down into your chamber and see that it's worn off. Okay. So the guy that through no criminal intent whatsoever is down at the range using his gun now has worn the microstamping off of the end of his firing pin. He's what now? Felon because he's got a defaced microstamp?
Well, it would be, as we've discussed, kind of at length over the history of the podcast and in goal, it's all about creating that felon in waiting. Of course we got you when we want you.
Of course it is. The mandate places the burden on the gun owner. So, that guy who innocently gets worn out, but then who gets to maintain the database? Is this a state thing? Is it a company thing that gets farmed out?
Sure
if I have a broken firing pin and I need to replace it for whatever reason, it's getting worn down, light strike, whatever. What is the process by which I, a law-abiding non-criminal, now have to go through in order to get a new goddamn firing pin for my carry?
So presumably, this is going to get into not only covering the existing swath of firearms that are legally and lawfully owned, but any firing pin moving in the future is, and like this Ashford guy said, that it's going to have to be a legal mandate. So what they're eventually going to have to do, in order to make this actually function the way that they're talking about, is you will have to submit your firing pins for microstamping.
I mean, or what? They're going to mandate all of the manufacturers to offer microstamped firing pins? Come on. Of course they're not going to.
Which is the argument for the conflict of interest of this guy, the president and CEO who owns the technology, who
just happens to offer the machines that do this kind of thing, which I'm sure he'll be happy to part with at a price.
Yeah, so I'm sure it'll be one of those things where, similar to the serial numbers, you can get it done by an FFL with an 07 manufacturer's license, who will have to get the serial number or the code or whatever, the code file issued from the state. It'll have to be set up and transferred and recorded. And because this guy's company does offer, as a commercial service now, for individuals to submit their firearms for microstamping. Now, of course,
voluntarily.
They want all of your personal information, all your personal contact information, photocopies of your IDs, driver's license, front, back. They want copies of your passport, oddly enough. But it's going to create the overarching another layer of registry where you're going to have record of firearm owner, where you live, anywhere you move to. We all know that stuff's already there. All the background checks for the ammunition, the background checks for the firearms. And they're going to now have an added in section where they're going to have a database of microstamping impressions for firing pins. Yeah. So now that firing pin is going to be linked to that particular firearm everywhere it goes.
Well, we said that 135 wasn't going to be the end of it. And of course it's not.
And of course,
this is all right. So before we doomsay too much here, this is a commission, right? They would have to go through their process and then make recommendations to the legislature, and then the legislature would have to pick it up and then, go through that whole thing. So this is not a law tomorrow. However, the writing is on the wall. It's pretty obvious to me what the direction is here.
watching the initial two hearings, the two meetings that they had.
Yeah, this is
listening to the tone and tenor, and especially with the veracity at which they're arguing in favor of it.
Oh, yeah.
Again, when I say they, I mean, obviously like Peter Durant's on our side, Jake McQuiggan's on our side.
They are speaking as though it's already a done deal and that they're just...
Oh, the Ashford guy says, I support this legislation. It's like, as if the legislation already exists.
Like, what legislation? This is the second meeting. The only thing you did at the last meeting was introduce each other. So, this,
He said, and I don't want to say it as a quote because I might mix a couple words around. He says, I want to make it clear that I support the legislation, but I don't think it goes far enough, which is like,
of course,
that's the rallying cry of the anti-gun community.
Spoken like a true Ron Mariano appointee.
But I think it is more likely than not that this commission will recommend a microstamping law for legislation.
Yeah, no question.
And I don't foresee enough pushback in the legislature to not move that forward.
No, the only way that it doesn't get moved forward is if they don't have the appetite for it, if they're focused on other things. But if they want another gun bill, this is it. It will absolutely be law.
I don't even think you have to go so far as to say them having the appetite for it. It's just they don't have the appetite to not do it.
That's what
this is like. It's such a foregone conclusion in the mind of the anti-Second Amendment individual that this is like, there's not even going to be a debate and a question. I would be shocked if this even made it through formal session.
Yeah, it's coming, folks. Stay involved.
So this is going to be more a matter of not whether or not they pass some sort of bill related to microstamping. It's to what depth and what. Yeah, and what else is going to be attached to it?
If they go the California route, and we said this kind of offline before we got started here, the framework is already in place. They have the rosters. They have all this other stuff that's designed basically to make it difficult. Who's to say that they just won't admit to the roster any firearms that don't have microstamping? There you go. Guess what? We're California now. No new guns at all. Period. Or they go the New Jersey route and say, if the technology exists, then every FFL must offer for sale at least one model that has it. And then some guy gets to corner the marketplace because he's the one guy that has, and everybody has to carry it. So there's different ways that they could go about it, but I don't think there's any question that they're going to do something.
I don't even think they go that far. I think they just end up treating it like the serial number and say that, hey, all firearms are going to have microstamp pins that are recorded with the state, and you're going to have until this deadline to get it done.
Yeah, they've already shown that they don't care about placing onerous burdens on people. They just say, no, thou shalt do this, and, costs too much. It's too hard. It's impossible. The technology doesn't exist. Too bad. So anyway, yeah, I'm a little bit hot about that. So we're going to keep watching this one, and I know that Mike and Jim and the folks at the office are already making phone calls and so forth around this. So we will see what happens.
We shall see. Now, on the federal level, so there's been some recent Second Amendment movement, I guess you would call it. I would argue that this really isn't as much movement as some people are claiming, but federally speaking,
it was like, cool, but it doesn't really seem to have any.
The Trump administration on February 7th released an executive order titled, quote, protecting Second Amendment rights. I'm sorry.
He promised this this was a campaign promise. And then immediately, like the day after his inauguration, he was like, there's big gun stuff coming. Just wait. Big stuff.
Oh, and the fawning and fangirling over this executive order's been intense. Although I have seen it start to come down, like now that the initial wave of emotions,
reality starting to set.
I mean, but it was refreshing to see an administration say in no uncertain terms that it is foundational to maintaining all other rights held by Americans, that the right to keep and bear arms must not be infringed.
Yeah.
I appreciate that statement. I appreciate seeing it on paper that someone actually said the thing.
The sentiment is nice, and it's not something that we would have expected to see a president say in a couple of decades anyway.
No, but talk is cheap, so to speak, and action and results are what we really need. So the plan of action is that within 30 days, the Attorney General, which is Pam Bondi, shall examine orders, regulation, guidance, so on, of executive departments and agencies to assess any ongoing infringements of the Second Amendment. Now, this sounds a lot to me like, well, we're going to think about it.
Yeah, right. This is like, oh, hey, would you mind looking at that for me?
She's, then going to make recommendations to the domestic policy advisor, Vince Haley, about how to protect the Second Amendment rights of Americans. Saying that they shall review, and then, from an implementation standpoint, under submission of a proposal or a proposed plan of action, the Attorney General will work with the domestic policy advisor to finalize a plan of action and establish a process for implementation. So to me, it's a lot of words to say,
hey, take a look at our policies.
We're thinking about it, and maybe we'll make some recommendations.
Yeah.
Now, Attorney General Pam Bondi had released a memo just, 48 hours before that.
Yep.
A memorandum for all Department of Justice employees. Within that, it discussed shifting ATF resources. So Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, Explosives shall shift resources from its alcohol and tobacco enforcement programs to focus on other prioritized matters that the administration currently has. She did say that no resources shall be diverted from their regulatory responsibilities, such as federal firearms licenses and background checks. So, barring any further information, it sounds like status quo,
pretty much,
for the ATF as far as firearms are concerned.
Like you said, it's nice to actually hear somebody say the words for once. But it sounds to me like a lot of, hey, why don't you guys check this because I need to throw a bone to some people who voted for me. And then Pam Bondi, who does not have a great background on the Second Amendment, is now the Attorney General, and she's basically telling the ATF, so take a look at this, but don't stop spending money on licensing and
it extends from January 2021 to January 2025. So we're only talking about the last 4 years. We're not talking about anything prior to that.
Yeah, including his own policies from the first time he was president.
Exactly. And they've both Trump himself and Bondi spoke openly in favor of things like red flag laws, age-based restrictions.
Take the guns, due process later.
Which is just a contradiction in terms of on its...
Yeah. Yes.
The concept of due process for those that are kind of new to the constitutional side of things. Due process really describes the order of operations, the sequence of events that need to happen to restrict your rights.
That's why they call it process.
So to say that due process is delayed it negates the concept
of the process. Yeah. So I've made no secret of my feelings on the matter. I prefer, that Trump elected than his alternative for sure. But I don't necessarily trust him with the Second Amendment. I guess we're going to have to see. Again, not to be too much of a doomsayer again, it is nice to see somebody say the words for once.
We've discussed it kind of at length. I would like to see some true real movement.
Yeah, so would I.
From a federal level, it's nice to see them say that they're going to look into maybe potentially not screwing over people as bad as that have been.
Right.
But it begs the question is what do you do with all of the FFLs that had their businesses destroyed over the last 4 years over minor stuff, clerical errors, transposed numbers, and all of that.
Put USA in the county box and stuff like that. And
what about what about SB Tactical? What about rare breed triggers and the FRTs that had their company torpedoed by the ATF? Brian Malinowski's still dead. Yep. He was still executed by what I would personally describe as a criminally reckless search warrant execution. I don't see him coming back to life because they said they're going to review anything. So it's a lot of
can still happen tomorrow.
It's a lot of the damage has been done. What are you doing to rectify it?
Yeah.
How are you going to make people whole again that had their rights unlawfully and unconstitutionally infringed?
And that's why I say it's kind of like, it sounds like it's great saying the words, but it's not.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like he didn't come out and say, repeal the NFA or,
Great performance by the cheerleaders. Let's go and win the football game, please.
Right. I don't know. We'll see if anything else comes of it, if any actual change comes of it. And of course, there's still the open question of who's going to run the ATF if it's going to exist going forward.
Yep. The ATF is still without an acting director.
Yep.
And one of the things that all this was missing, you don't want that job.
I had no problem going in there and cleaning the house.
But the other thing that this is missing is it it only applies to federal executive branch agencies.
Well, of course.
It doesn't do anything as far as by means of addressing the states that have thumbed their nose at the Constitution, that have thumbed their nose at the United States Bill of Rights, that have thumbed their nose at the United States Supreme Court rulings.
Not without primacy and stuff like that.
So really, it's like, hey, yeah, like we said, thanks for the memo. Things aren't changing here in Massachusetts for the better. So I would very, very much appreciate the administration finding some leverage over the states that are essentially telling the people that they don't have rights unless the state decides they're suitable to have those rights.
And speaking of which, Ocean State Tactical and Snope are still in limbo.
No movement.
It
doesn't even have an update that it's been rescheduled.
Yeah, nothing. So anyway, we are now at we're in the middle of February. Middle of February already. So this is going to be it's our first episode of February. So where are we in history? So we're doing our lead up to April the 19th, 1775, the 250th anniversary of the shot heard around the world. We left off with the powder raid in Somerville, right?
Yeah. So the last couple of podcast episodes, we were kind of catching up over the last over a series of years of things that were building up, but we're finally kind of in the present time in 1775. So following successful powder raids in Somerville, the colonists reacted with the volume and the unity through committees of correspondence. So hearing plans for another powder raid in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, Paul Revere rode from Boston to Portsmouth. So he did multiple rides, not just the one everybody's heard about.
That guy
was able to warn colonists in time. They sacked the fort of powder and munitions before the British could mobilize. Similar efforts across New England, concentrating supplies inland away from British strongholds.
Yeah, moving things away from the coast.
And the British Parliament formally declared Massachusetts in a state of rebellion. And the governor of Massachusetts, Gage, issued basically as close to an ultimatum as he could, telling England if they mean to suppress this rebellious behavior, they better send reinforcements and be prepared to actually fight it out.
And in a hurry. Like, if you're going to send people, you better do it right now because we're in trouble.
The focus in the first couple weeks of February was England was trying to, this was kind of England's last ditch effort, I would say, to avoid actually fighting out the issues. So Lord North proposed this conciliatory resolution. So it's hard to tell if they really understood the consequences of their decisions in British Parliament in early, February 1775. There was a letter from Earl of Dunmore, so the governor of Virginia, to the Earl of Dartmouth, who is the Secretary of State for the colonies, and this was received February 11th. So actually the date that we're recording this.
Yeah.
Saying that every county is now arming a company of men for the avowed purpose of protecting their committees and to be employed against the government if necessary. As to the power of the government, I can assure your lordship that it is entirely disregarded, if not wholly overturned. I am firmly persuaded that the colony must be brought to see the necessity of depending on its mother country and embracing its authority. That's a real nice way of saying it.
Well, yeah.
As the Parliament's having their discussions, so they're saying, all right, we have a state of rebellion. What are we going to do?
Right.
Lord Barrington moved to enable the augmentation of land forces with a little over 4,000 men. He wanted the British forces in Boston to be kept right around the 10,000 mark. Yeah. And that vote was 91-15 in favor. So
this was after Thomas Gage said, you need to send me lot of dudes.
If you think 10,000 guys, send 20. If you think a million, send 2
million.
So,
and they're like, oh, okay, well, you can have a 4,300 guys.
Yeah, this is a little, underestimating the opposition.
Yeah.
But so Lord North, who was the Prime Minister of Great Britain at the time, created his conciliatory proposal. It was a measure he thought would do kind of one of two things. It was going to polarize and force the hand. It was either going to stop the rebellion in its tracks or reveal the true motives of the colonists to overthrow the crown. So this was like, you're going to have to decide, America.
Yeah, it's like
which way you want to go.
Fight or hit the fence kind of thing right now.
So to paraphrase his pitch, he said he wanted to offer some propositions which might be grounds for resolution. So on the matter of taxation, every part of the empire is bound to bear its share of service and burthen to the common defense. if the Americans would propose means and give assurances to raise their share of the taxes, or the contributions, as he put it, themselves, the quarrel on the subject of taxation would be at an end. If they do not meet us on this ground, it will prove that they have other views and are actuated by other motives. If they reject it, their blood must be upon their own hearts. And he said that he had hopes that there were good people and hoped that colonies that wish for peace, and by these means hope that they will find their way to it. So he's essentially saying is England sets the vig, we tell the colonies what they owe, and then it's up to the colonists to raise their money however they see fit.
And if they don't raise the money, then it means that they don't really care to be part of the family anymore and that they're opting out. You don't want to be part of the family.
This was their idea of combating the taxation without representation argument. They say, listen, we're just going to tell you what you owe, and then you can raise the money however you want, tax however you want, figure out how you want to get it. You can do it in your own little fiefdoms or whatever.
Yeah.
And there you go. You're representing yourself.
They're trying to smoke out like sentiment, I think, because at this point, a lot of the feelings are still very much divided at this point as to whether or not this was a general feeling of rebellion or if it was, a few rabble rousers, a few loudmouths that were making moves on behalf of everybody.
So it's putting that one against the other out there.
Smoke them out.
So there was heated debate, and I would say heated for 1770s England.
It got pretty smoky.
With some arguing the Americas and Britain were already in a state of declared war, so force was already necessary to meet other force. Others said, yeah, but even if war's inevitable, at some point you're going to have to come to some sort of reconciliation. You're going to have to negotiate
sooner or later, no matter who wins a war. Sooner or later, you're going to have to come to a table, and all of those dead bodies are going to have to be talked about.
But some people, some counted that any negotiations comes secondary to the Americas in very clear terms, publicly acknowledging the supremacy of the British Parliament.
Yeah.
Like, hey, regardless of what we do, you got to say that we rule the roost here.
Yeah. Those are the authoritarians who are like, nope.
Now, so Mr. Edmund Burke made a careful observation, and it would ultimately prove true. And he said that the complaint of the Americans was not the mode of taxation not being up to themselves, but that neither the amount or the application was their choice. They had no freedom of choice in the whole thing.
Yeah, right.
So the way he thought of it, and I think that ultimately bore out true, is he said the colonies are to be held as prisoners of war unless they consent to a ransom by bidding at auction against each other until the king and the parliament are satisfied. So
that's how it works.
And that these, tricks in government are sometimes successful when you're dealing with people who maybe don't understand how the world works, but
they're not stupid.
But this is a pretty obvious, this is obviously a bad deal.
Yeah.
Then they're not going to go for it. And he had a bunch of support. So most realized early on that this wasn't, like any other colonial rebellion from some far-reaching corner of the empire.
Which is what they'd been used to up to now. Oh, it's an uprising. Go tamp it down, and
Yep, and
different.
Temple Luttrell, another member of British Parliament, said that the threats and use of violence against the heart of the same sturdy temper as your own, talking to Parliament, will produce calamity to both parties. And he said he was against the resolution because he thinks far from extinguishing the flame, it will throw oil on it, and it cannot possibly have any other construction other than adding insult to injury.
So General John Burgoyne, who was later going to serve as the commander of British reinforcements arriving in Boston in May of 1775, a little bit later on, he had this to say: I have observed through the course of the debate that a great latitude of orders is to be given, some of which convey the most inflammatory of ideas, others the most humiliating concessions. Should we be made the instruments of punishment, care must be taken that the honor of the British arms not be insulted, while we remember that we are contending against fellow subjects and brothers. The trial now is only whether we have the spirit to support our own conviction. If the whole body of the kingdom does not rouse at this alarm, I agree the sooner a formal surrender is made, the better. Let Great Britain revert to her primitive insignificancy in the map of the world. Let us spare the blood of our subjects and the treasures of the state, and at the same time confess we are no more a people.
Yeah, so
those are pretty strong words coming from a man of such breeding and stature. He's like, here we go.
Yeah, and he would make an appearance in May of 75.
yes.
So he was one of the people that was going to be on the ground.
He's one of the major players, right? He's like, I'm going to be one of the people who is, making blood decisions. So,
but it talks to the ego and the attitude of the British Empire, saying that like, hey, listen, if we're giving this up, then we might as well just tuck tail and go home.
yeah.
We've lost our place in the world.
Close up shop and give all of those possessions back to.
We are no longer the empire that is the British Empire.
Yeah,
basically saying it's over. And ultimately, the committee passed the resolution 274 to 88. So
there we go.
That was they decided that was the offer they were going to make to the Americans.
Now it's up to the Americans to respond. And it through all of these things, it's like important. I try to keep in mind that, if you're talking about communication across the Atlantic Ocean, it can take weeks.
Oh, and doing the research for this stuff.
Oh yeah.
I'm looking at correspondence and
weeks for stuff to get from here to there.
You have letters dated December of 1774 being received in March of 1775.
Right. Yeah.
With information that would, you're reading some of the stuff. It's like, that's kind of critical information that they needed to know.
It will probably, I'm sure that we'll touch on it as later on, but this is one of the primary reasons that ground commanders were like gods. I mean, they were given the power to, like, you go wage this war because you can't ask the crown or parliament for permission to do stuff because it'll be 6 months before we get an answer to you. Your job is to go make this happen. Go make it happen. And for better or worse, that was it.
And that was the pressure that was the pressure that Governor Gage was under.
Yeah.
It's to say, hey, you are here as a representative of the king, of the crown of England.
Yeah. You can't.
What the hell, bro?
You can't pick up a phone and say, hey, what do I do?
We send you here to keep these people in check. You are embarrassing, in their societal hierarchical structure. It's like, you are embarrassing your higher ups. And at that point, your higher ups are royalty.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
the ultimate rock and hard place, that guy.
To dishonor the family name.
Oh my God.
Would be huge.
Oh, it's terrible. Terrible. Reputation was everything. So anyway, that's where we are now. We're coming right up.
Mid-February.
Pretty soon it'll be spring, and thank God for it. I can't wait for spring to roll around. I'm actually getting pretty sick of the cold.
Yep. And I just finished a fascinating book. I did the audiobook version, of course. So there's a series of books that I've gone through, and one of the books that I strongly recommend is The Road to Concord by J.L. Bell.
Yeah.
There's some really fascinating details, and Bell's theory is that the battles of Lexington and Concord really happened over 4 cannons. It was a series of cannons and field pieces that were stolen out of Boston, and he tells a story about how they were procured by the colonists, where they hid them, how they got them out of town. But
yeah, right on. I know the story, but I'll dive into the detail. I'll probably pick up that book.
Yeah, like hiding them in a schoolhouse in a bin of firewood, and then they had to move it because hey, it's winter, it's cold. They're gonna eventually find the thing.
Well, if we're doing book recommendations, I listened to 1776 again. Just because I recommended it to you. And I'm like, it's been a while since I heard it. So what the hell? It's not a terribly long book, but it is fascinating. David McCullough's book, he wrote it a long time ago. Definitely worth a listen, especially as we get into the season that we're getting into now. Other than that, though, hunting season's coming.
In April, like end of April.
Oh, come on, man. I was getting excited. It's February. Hunting season's coming.
Let me pull it up.
Half, I guess. All right, 2 months then.
So for the 2025 hunters, now that there's going to be fewer of them after Chapter 135, the 2025 hunting seasons have been published. It's available on mass.gov, so you can check that out to find out whatever particular seasons are relevant to you. And then if you log into your account on Mass Fish Hunt, that's massfishhunt.mass.gov. Licenses are available, so you can start picking up those big game hunting licenses, permits, stamps, all the things that you have to pay.
Yep.
Pay the permission.
The permission fee.
But yeah, it's getting ready. So what did we talk about? So I got to get you out wild spring turkey. That's going to be April 28th to May 24th. So you, sir, are taking opening day off from work.
Yep.
That's a non-negotiable. Deer season towards the fall. It looks like archery season is going to open up October 6th and run all the way to the end of November. Shotgun is going to be the first 2 weeks of December, and primitives are going to be primitive firearms.
Yep. True.
So your muzzleloaders, which aren't even really primitive anymore, according to the state,
is
going to be the last 2 weeks of December, or the 15th through the end of December.
Maybe not time to get out in the woods just yet, but it's but it's coming.
But it is there. Licenses, fishing licenses, and all those things are available for the 2025 season. So, yeah.
And
up on it.
And also keep your eyes open for another goal raffle. Those have been going great.
Yeah, the new goal raffle. So for the folks that are unaware of what's going on or how they're structuring or organizing it, instead of doing like just one raffle for the spring and it going on for months, and it surprisingly takes a lot of bandwidth.
Many thousands of paper tickets littering up the office and having to be tracked and accounted for. And yeah, it's a huge undertaking. They are doing smaller raffles, but more frequently with ticket limits. So there's a cap of 500 tickets that are being sold. They're $10 a ticket, and no crazy deals or whatever. Easy to calculate, easy to figure. And typically what they're doing is putting up a list of like a few firearms, and the winner gets to pick whichever firearm they want. They've also done ammunition, and I think they're looking at a couple other things later in 2025. They've been very popular. The couple that they've run so far have sold out in a couple of hours. They're a lot easier to handle. The odds are better because the tickets are limited, and the ticket amounts are limited. And so far, so good.
Yep. Odds are easy to calculate.
Yeah, right. So good.
And yeah, it's been great for goal. It's been a good, solid fundraiser. So the only caveat is you really have to pay attention to the emails you receive from Goal. Absolutely double check your Friday news and look for stuff in the in-between, because when the raffle goes up, they are selling out usually within a
couple hours.
We've seen them go as fast as a couple hours. We've seen them last maybe a day or two.
Yeah.
So if you get that email and you see that there's a raffle available and there's some firearms in there that you want, definitely click on the link and pick up your tickets.
All right. And then while you're at it, go to goal.org, pick up your ticket for the annual meeting on May the 18th at Cyprian Keys. We will see you there.
That's it for today. Thanks for listening in. Be sure to subscribe to the Goal Podcast and check us out on Facebook at facebook.com/Goal Podcast MA, on YouTube at the Goal Podcast, or on Twitter at Goal Update.
To join Goal, visit goal.org and click the Join Renew button at the top of the homepage.
If you have a topic you think we should cover, if there's something going on in your club or town, or if you have a question for the mailbag, shoot us an email, goalpodcast@goal.org.
The Goal Podcast is a production of Gun Owners Action League of Massachusetts. The views and opinions expressed are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect those of Goal, its staff, or affiliates.